Hi there. Today it's really cold outside. I thought it would be a perfect day to make a pot roast. So that's what I'm going to make today. There's going to be a storm also tonight, so I'm not going to be going out anytime soon. So I bought a chuck roast, which is probably the best cut that you could purchase for this pot roast. I'm going to use the standard carrots and potatoes, and I'm also going to use a turnip and some green beans. So this recipe calls for a cup of red wine, but you can also use like a dark beer. I'm using a German beer. So this is a really, really hearty recipe. I hope you enjoy this. You're going to want to use 3 or 4 garlic cloves, or how much you like. I use about 3 or 4 in here, and I use 1 onion. In this case, I make my own rub. I just put, say, about a teaspoon or a teaspoon and a half of salt, about a half a teaspoon of pepper, probably a teaspoon of garlic powder, and probably about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of ground thyme. And I'm going to mix everything together just like this, and then I'm going to rub the top and bottom with this. You could let it soak in for a while, half hour, an hour, whatever you want to do. I'm going to let it soak in for probably about an hour. So you have all your seasonings. You could add other seasonings if you want, but I'm just adding these seasonings. So I'm going to let this sit for about an hour. Everything I'm going to do for this pot roast is going to be done in this roasting pan. So I'm going to start with about 2 tablespoons of olive oil, approximately 2 tablespoons, and then I'm going to add my 1 onion chopped. And I'm going to saute these onions for probably about 2 minutes, 2 to 3, until they're translucent and kind of softer. After your onions are sauteed, you're going to put them aside because you are going to cook them more. That's why you didn't want to cook them till they were real dark. Now you're going to take some lard. I'm using like a tablespoon of bacon grease on a hot roasting skillet. You can use lard or whatever you want. I just have quite a bit of bacon lard, and it gives the roast quite a bit of flavor. So I'm going to melt this down. Once your grease is melted, you're going to take your roast, which has been sitting in this seasoning rub for an hour, and I'm going to put it in the roasting pan. I'm going to sear it about 2 or 3 minutes on each side. So after about 2 or 3 minutes, we're going to flip this and sear it on the other side for about the same time, about 2 or 3 minutes. After you finish searing your chuck roast, you're going to add your onions back in. We're going to saute these longer until they're golden brown. This is how you want your onions, nice and brown. You're going to add your garlic now. You're going to kind of stir that around. Then you're going to add a 1/4 cup of tomato paste. You're going to add a cup of either red wine, or I'm using a German beer. And then you're going to have like 1 3/4 cup of beef broth. we're going to mix all that together. A little sprinkle of thyme, a little more, and then you're going to have another, like a small sprinkle of garlic, and then you're going to add salt and pepper to your taste. You'll want to take a little taste of your broth that you've created here and see if it's to your liking, if it has enough of all the seasonings you want. So I tasted it, and it tastes just perfect. I could taste the beer in it also. So the only thing it really needs to my liking would be a little more pepper. So that's the only thing I need to add for myself. So make sure you taste it at this stage before you put this in the oven. Our next step is putting our roast in the roasting pan and just kind of covering everything like this. Put a little bit of the broth over it, but it's all going to cook together with the lid on it. So what we're going to do now is put our lid on top and cook it for an hour and a half, 1 hour and 30 minutes. So this goes in the oven for an hour and 30 minutes. 350-degree oven. The vegetables that I'm going to be putting in the pot roast after it cooks an hour and a half will be a turnip. It'll be a sweet potato, carrots, a regular russet potato, and some green beans. Now normally I don't put green beans in a pot roast, but I have them. So nothing's going to be mushy because it all goes in. After an hour and a half, I will cut these up. And of course a potato I'll just cut in half, and I'll cut this probably in quarters. And it'll go in for an hour to cook. That way the vegetables stay nice and, you know, well cooked but not mushy. So these are what we're going to use. And I've scrubbed these carrots really well, so I'm not going to peel the skins off. I think the only dish that I do where I don't peel the skins off are in a pot roast. I kind of like leaving the skins on. And of course, I will remove the skins from the potatoes. So we're getting everything ready. I decided to add a few more potatoes, but I'm not going to cut them in small pieces because they'll be cooking for about an hour and I want them to stay fairly firm and not mushy. The same thing with the sweet potatoes. The turnip, we're going to cut these in like inch size pieces. These will be cut like a little smaller. This is our pot roast after 1 hour and 30 minutes. So you can see how nice it is. So now what we're going to do is add all our vegetables. So we're going to cook it for 1 more hour and add our vegetables. All your vegetables for the most part are submerged in the sauce. There's a few outside of the sauce. I'm just going to add a little bit more beef broth, which will just give it a little more gravy and sauce. It's not going to hurt it at all. Because now this is going to cook for 1 hour at 350 degrees and then everything will be done. Here's our beef stew. It's all ready. So what we're going to do is let it set just a few minutes and then we'll serve it up. So here's our beef chuck roast. There is a fine line, or can be a fine line, between a beef stew and a beef pot roast. So when you make a beef stew, you cut up the meat in chunks, but when you make a pot roast, you leave the meat in one whole big piece, which is what I did. But if you put enough sauce in, it can make kind of like a beef stew, and it's kind of like has its own gravy. And it just depends on how you like it. There's many ways to make a pot roast, but the way I made it today is very saucy, it's like a beef stew. So let's give it a taste. First of all, here's a parsnip. Here's the carrot. It's real nice and firm. And of course our potato is still firm. It's soft, but it's not mushy. So this is still very hot. I'm going to taste the broth first. Absolutely delicious. And that tomato paste really helps give it that, like that red saucy flavor. So the meat is very, very tender. And it turned out just fabulous. If you're in the mood to have something hearty, this pot roast is absolutely yummy. And like I said, it's kind of a cross between a beef stew and a pot roast. So I hope you give this a try, and I hope it turns out wonderful for you. You can see how tender this meat is. It just falls apart, literally. Very, very tender.